this thing.
All right, Cristine, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast. I'm super excited to dive in today because I know time management, procrastination, productivity, all those types of topics are something that so many people would love to learn more about, the secret hacks and all that. So I'm excited to have you on today.
Thanks for having me here, Renee. I'm excited to begin sharing this stuff with you.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit, how did you get started with this journey of helping other people with time management, procrastination, productivity, all of that type of stuff?
Thank you. I'm one of those people who have the story of recovering their own crazy background stuff with the
Yep.
topic before becoming an expert in the topic. So my background included intense and chronic and constant procrastination. I'm just a queen of figuring out how to avoid doing things. I'm
Yeah.
the queen of not knowing how to prioritize what I'm doing. I'm sometimes the queen of clutter. And I think my mind just works in somewhat unusual ways. Sometimes I think I might have a little bit of attention deficit. Who
Mm.
knows? But
Mhm.
I very much know that in my earlier years, high school, college, even in graduate school, feeling like I was just hanging on for dear life in a way, even though my grades were good and I was having fun and socializing, there was not a piece of organizational structure in what I was doing. So I just really empathize with people who are motivated, but don't really have that system, that mindset, that set of action steps in place to
Yeah.
make their lives go more easily.
Yeah.
And so that's where my heart is. That is what I've recovered from. And that's what I'm here to do. That's what I'm here to share. A little bit more about that story is I am trained as a clinical psychologist. So I went all the way through a doctoral program, not really addressing this procrastination problem because I actually thought this was just how I'm made. This is
Mm.
just how my brain is. This is what I'm going to have to cope with for the rest of my life. Then I got my first job stint at a university counseling service. And in that university, there was a dean who needed a procrastination workshop. And being the volunteer that I am, I raised my hand and said, I'll do that. But meanwhile, I knew nothing about the topic, started researching. And then, of course, the skies opened up because this was me in a nutshell in a book. And then
Yeah.
I designed the workshop and realized it's not so hard to teach this stuff. And I actually need this the most.
Mm.
And from that point on, I've basically been making my way here to this moment of just being online, sharing this message, maybe being that turnaround point for somebody else.
Yep.
And let's go.
Yeah. Isn't that funny though? So often it is the thing that we teach is the thing that we want to work on the most ourselves. And that thing that was such a huge obstacle and roadblock for us. And when we start to pave through it and find a way out, it's so easy to share it with other people. And I mean, I'm the same way. I was even talking about it this morning with my assistant, and we were talking about just creating. She was like, it sounds like you want to help people create inner peace. And I was like, yes, like that is the biggest thing for me. And, but yet that's the thing that I'm striving so much for. Like when I look at my values, like peace is a huge one on there. So it makes sense that that's what I want to share and help other people do the same way. So when we think about procrastination, what does that look like? Because I think everybody might have a different definition of what like procrastination looks like, or like you said, not even aware that that's the issue in the first place. So, what does procrastination, how does it show up in our lives and what does it look like?
Great question. And I would agree with you. I feel like there may be no one singular definition of it. And certainly as a psychologist, I've seen hundreds and thousands of ways in which we can each go about procrastinating. And
Mhm.
that is what I love about being a psychologist, because I get to see the unique way that other people use their unique brains. That's what I love about being a psychologist. And what I love about doing this procrastination coaching work is that all of those unique ways can be shifted just like 1 or 2%
Yeah.
to the point where the person feels like, oh, there's another option for me. I don't have to stay here in hiding. I don't have to be embarrassed anymore. I can actually do 5 more minutes on this thing. So there's so many different ways that procrastination can look like. It can look like real suffering,
Mm,
where the person is getting themselves sick with worry, sick with shame, sick with isolation, sick with literally not taking care of their health.
yeah.
And it could also be much more subtle in ways like perfectionism, where it looks like the person is just top performer, doing well, always there on time, but inside they're constantly comparing themselves to other people, feeling not good enough. That's a
Mhm.
form of procrastination as well. And I think that can be just as toxic as the other kind that I
Yeah.
described.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's so true, like, that perfectionism can be, like, putting off that thing that we need to do or whatnot, and how we hold out being like, "Oh, I need to make it perfect. I need to make it perfect," and how that's holding us back. So how do you see, because I know you talked a little bit about too at the beginning of this organization, and that you felt like maybe you're just not an organized person. And I know lots of people out there might be sitting there feeling that way of like, I'm just not organized. And I hear that all the time in terms of like decluttering and creating that space too, is I'm just not an organized person. And so that struggle to keep up with everything going on and keep moving forward. But it sounds like from your story that it doesn't necessarily require being organized in order to be productive, right? And so how does that look? Like, what are some of that, how's that journey been in terms of like creating that productivity without necessarily feeling like you have to be organized?
Great question, because I think if I have to be honest with myself, as much coaching and therapy as I've had as a client myself, I still feel like I'm a pretty unorganized person or disorganized
Mhm.
person, but I have made strides, like I have said. And I would say I really do believe that anyone can make progress. I think that's my basic philosophy, is that no matter how you feel you are built, there
Mhm.
is room for connecting with a coach, for looking on Pinterest and seeing what you like, for trying out a new outfit, trying out a new message, trying out a new voice,
Yeah.
and just believing that that's going to be okay. I think the problem happens when we believe these things are fixed and we
Mm.
believe they're in our character and that there
Yeah.
are no other options. I think that is the only real problem, is mindset related and belief system
Yep.
related. The rest is all flexible. So if you really get that in your heart and your head, you can make anything happen.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's like so powerful how our minds have so much power over everything, right? And the way we look at our world, and you even, like I said this morning, I was talking to my assistant. I was like, gosh, your house can be a hot mess and you can still have that inner calm and that inner peace because you decide to, and you put that intention forth rather than just feeling like everything's coming your way, right? It's like putting yourself in that position, in that driver's seat, to be intentional about the choices and the way you're showing up in the world and all of that. So I think that that's huge. And the way your mind power in it is awesome.
May I add to that?
Yeah.
I like what you said about intention. What is your intention? I would encourage everyone who's listening to set your vision, your
Mhm.
picture, your desired outcome, whatever your term for that is, what you're wishing for, what
Yeah.
you're looking at, what you really want, and how do you want your space to look, even, whatever it is, set that first. Don't let your belief system about how you're created be the only thing that's in the picture. Really, the picture that should be guiding you is the picture that you want to have happen. Start
Yes.
there and then make those intermediary steps happen one by one.
Yep.
Maybe you need a little bit of coaching help. That's totally fine. We all do
Yep.
sometimes. And just go with the belief that you can attain that. You can make that journey. So a lot of it is, yes, mindset and belief in yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's true. Like even, you talked a little bit about like those I know I've talked about in some of my programs. It's like you're never going to get to that place where you feel like your house is clutter free and you feel really great if you're constantly telling yourself that you're you're cluttered, that you're chaotic, like it's crazy. Like you have to kind of start with those pieces too. You can't just expect that by doing it all externally that it's going to tap into that internal world. And so there's like this balance between the two working together, right?
Yes.
And so a little change in topic and segue here, but I know that a big piece of this and procrastination is a lot of time, right? Like how we can the productivity, procrastination conversation all comes down to time and how can we get our time back? And I know that that's a valuable thing for so many people. Like there's two major commodities we have in this world is like time and money. And which one are you willing to trade more of? And oftentimes I feel like we do tend to trade the time. And so, what are some of those strategies and tools that you've used to help get more time and eliminate kind of that procrastination and increase that productivity?
Great question. I have a number of responses, most likely. I would say the one that comes to mind is actually not time based. And really, my biggest time saver is removing that self critical voice
Mm,
that I used to have really loudly and all the time for all the reasons in my head.
yeah.
And for our listeners, if there is a smidge of that for you, you can experiment with just shutting that off temporarily. You can always bring it back if you want to. But I think you're going to find that when you say, you know what, instead of sitting here for another 3 minutes thinking of how much of a low life I am, I'm going to just focus on what the work needs from me. What is
Mhm.
needed next from me instead of yelling at myself for forgetting to do it or doing it too slowly or not doing it well enough or not doing it brilliantly enough. That can save you so much time and energy.
Yeah.
So I would say your energy is also another valuable resource that we tend to
Yeah.
trade
Yeah.
too carelessly sometimes. So that's the second tip, I guess, for time management is to conserve your energy, protect your energy. And that means all sorts of things. That means going to the gym when you can do it. That means eating well. That means not cluttering your head with unnecessary thoughts. Again, the self
Mhm.
criticism and worry is another form of mental and emotional clutter. Get rid of the stuff that isn't serving your drive, your ambition, your sense of peace. There are things like Renee said, the values that you want to anchor yourself into and on so that all this other stuff, the comparison, Netflix, Instagram, complaining about stuff, all that stuff just falls by the wayside because you then become like this targeting machine of, oh, I know what I want. I know I'm going to get there and I know what not to do in order to save myself time. So it's a multi level system of
Yeah.
managing your energy and your thoughts, but it's available to everyone. And that's the wonderful news. That's the why I got so excited about doing this work because we can all do this.
Yeah. Well, and so my next question with that would be, so how do you do that, right? Like, and I know that's a conversation that I have with my clients all the time is retraining those thoughts. How and becoming aware of them is the first step in like knowing what those are. But and then you said like just shut them off, take a break, right? And then come back to them if you want them. But I think sometimes that shut it off part is one of the hardest ones that I know my clients tend to have. And even me personally, like shutting those thoughts off is one of those big hurdles that we have to work through. So what would be kind of those recommendations and or tools that you have to be able to kind of shut that inner critic thought off and be able to redirect it?
My first thought in response to your question, your great question, is when I'm just going to cut to the chase and, therapy and coaching is great.
Yeah.
When you're having real difficulty with managing what's going on up there, it's worth the time, money, energy, and investment to help someone coach you through this. My first thought was really like, oh, do we have time for this on the podcast? Because, of course, each of us is so complex
Mhm.
by design. And sometimes the way we got to be self critical or disorganized is complicated and it does need some months or weeks of professional coaching or therapy to untangle.
Yeah.
But if it's not at that level, or if you don't feel like you can or want to go in that direction, I'm going to offer my 4F system for just loosening up your system. So the first F is forgiveness. I feel like until you forgive yourself, you're going to keep battering yourself. So that's
Yeah.
the piece that oftentimes we forget, that it's okay to say, you know what, I might have really badly screwed up, but today nobody needs to know that I did that. I don't need to remember and recall that over and over again. I can just start fresh. And I can say the goal is to do better next time, right?
Mhm.
So the first F is start with that forgiveness piece. If you start without that, it just slows you down.
Yeah.
The second F is then figuring out what you're afraid of, because sometimes we're keeping that negative Nelly voice in our head because we're actually afraid of facing or doing something well,
Yeah.
succeeding perhaps. So when you take care of the forgiveness layer, the fear then starts to come up because then you're a step closer to actually making something happen. So
Mhm.
challenge yourself and say, all right, I know I said this, but what I'm really afraid of is falling flat on my face, not being accepted, not being loved, not looking good in front
Mhm.
of my peers, whatever it is, small or large, let it out.
Yeah.
State it to yourself, write it down. And once you grapple with it, it gets much smaller. It gets just to be like, oh, that's just another silly thought I had about this project. Maybe the fear still exists. Maybe you can't do away with the fear, but you need to progress through life anyway. You need to get that thing done anyway. So
Yeah.
let's just be real, label the fear, keep going.
Yeah.
Third step is find your focus. Decide, what am I going to do? Because sometimes the problem, the reason why we stay in our head so much is we have no destination to head to. We haven't decided, oh, I'm going to get here. This is what
Yeah.
I want for myself. So forgiveness, fear, focus, and the last piece is flow. And that's another piece that is oftentimes left out, which is where you get to the destination and then you're on to the other thing, and you don't develop that habit of practice and integration where it really becomes easy for you, where it becomes like, I love this. I love this habit of going to the gym. I love
Yes.
thinking that I'm good enough. So you want to get that consistency, that practice, that reliability, and those additional wins
Mhm.
that happen when you stay with what you want.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think so for anybody that's listening can go back and listen to those again because I do think Christine these were gold, like truly, and I think even like you said though, each one of them has its own elements and how missing one layer of them can make it so much harder to navigate through. And I think that forgiveness one, that was a big one that I think oftentimes, particularly for my clients and stuff with that I do like in mom life, that forgiveness piece is huge. And I think we don't do it often enough, right? Like to look at, gosh, I yelled at my kids this morning and letting that forgiveness piece come in and how holding on to that does keep us from being productive and moving forward towards that focus of whatever else that we want to get done. And so our heads are continually spiraling on how poorly the morning went and we didn't get the kids out the door on time and we were yelling at them and then the whole rest of the day loses its steam and the productivity and that time that we're talking about because our thoughts are still dwelling on that like negativity that happened in the morning. And I think giving that space to allow that forgiveness doesn't negate that it happened, but it allows us to understand it and move forward and to create that space to create that focus going forward. And I think that that is huge. I think that that's a piece and an element that I haven't really even incorporated as much. It's just more of like, okay, let it go, let it go. But I think that element of forgiving ourselves for those mistakes is really powerful.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. And I absolutely agree with you. One of my basic beliefs is that if we do not feel well, we're not going to perform as well.
Hmm.
And it makes sense, but we forget that. It's just we're
Yes.
human,
Yeah.
we're trying so hard that we forget, oh, like we need to feel good
Yeah.
too. Like it's not just our effort, is kind of how we're feeling
Oh,
on a given
yeah.
day. That also matters.
Yes, yes, 100%. And like I teach inside my membership, like about that flow, but I use it in a little bit different way than you talked about was this element of like we are different at different times. And so when we're constantly running up against something that doesn't feel like, even I told my husband this morning, I was like, I spent an hour and a half writing this email and it felt like I was like pulling every piece of me to get it out. And I rewrote and rewrote and rewrote. And I know that that's because right now is not the time of my month when it's that creativity is flowing for me. And so learning to really operate in that makes a huge difference. Like when you're feeling so passionate and powerful and engaged in what you're doing, it makes a huge difference versus when you feel like you're forcing something.
Yes, excellent tip too, just
Yeah.
to know when you're flowing well and
Yeah.
when it's going to be maybe a little bit more difficult for you to get the words out or the thoughts out. Absolutely.
Yep. Yep. So as we get kind of closer to the end here, is there anything that you feel like you want to make sure you share and leave people with?
I think I just want to reinforce the idea of dreaming big for yourself and not being afraid about that, not
Mhm.
being embarrassed about that. And if you feel afraid or embarrassed, to take those cues as cues that there's something exciting and interesting and meaningful to
Yep.
you
Yep.
rather than saying, oh, it's just not for me. And I think this is an experience that we can all relate to, right? Because we are filled with the visions of abundance in which we live. We're surrounded by real and unseen abundance. And that can be daunting, but let's take that as an opportunity rather than as a reason to stay stuck or in a
Mhm.
state of fear. I just
Mhm.
really hope that for everyone who's on the call.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Okay, I loved it, and I think that it was amazing. There's lots of and, like, listening to those 5 Fs, and I kept saying S's, but in my head, I wanted to say S, but Fs. Go back and re-listen to those and jot them down and maybe even give yourself a check-in, like, are there certain ones that you feel like you do that are easier for you to do? And are there ones that are a little bit more challenging? And how can you both lay into those ones that are strengths for you and that come a little bit more natural for you, but also how can you grow in maybe those ones that are a little bit more challenging and not super innate and help yourself kind of move forward with that thought process and changing that productivity and procrastination and moving forward towards your goals, whatever that might look like. So, I know Christine and I would love to hear your thoughts on this episode. And I know she would love for you guys to go over and connect with her on the interwebs. So, Christine, where can they do that? Where can they find you and connect with you?
Thank you so much, Renee.
Yeah.
There are a couple places. The first is my website. It's procrastinationcoach.com. And I would say the second place I would love to see your followers in my sphere would be on my podcast. Just go to maketimeforsuccesspodcast.com and you'll see my recent episodes on this brand new podcast that I love. I'm excited to have Renee on the show very soon. And you're all welcome to give a listen, learn some more with me, and sign up with me on Facebook or Instagram. Again,
Yep.
procrastination coach all over the interwebs.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much for hopping on. This was amazing. And I appreciate the time you took out of your day to be here and show up and share with all of us and the amazing women that are tuning in today. So thank you so much, Christine.
Thank you, Renee. Your questions were beautiful, and I love your interviewing style. So thanks for
Thank
hosting
you.
me.
Thank you. Yeah. Have a great day.
You too.